This is Last Signal Radio broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. I'm James Carter with Kate Vincent, coming to you from our fortified studio in Denver, Colorado. And if you're hearing this transmission, stay inside, lock your doors, and do not approach anyone exhibiting erratic behavior. We are now 73 hours into what the World Health Organization is calling the cognitive necrosis pandemic before Geneva went silent 40 minutes ago. The pathogen, officially designated as prion variant NK7, attacks the frontal and temporal lobes of the brain, causing rapid neurological degeneration, violent psychosis, and complete loss of higher cognitive function within 18 to 36 hours of initial infection. Transmission occurs through direct fluid contact, primarily saliva and blood. The infection rate is catastrophic. We're looking at an R0 value of approximately 8.4, meaning each infected individual is transmitting to an average of 8.4 other people before they reach terminal stages. Current global infection estimates stand at 412 million people across 6 continents. Confirmed deaths have reached 93 million in the last 3 days. My colleague Kate Vincent is here with me, and together we're going to provide you with verified information that could save your life.
Thank you, James. And to everyone listening right now, I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you is going to sound like something from a horror film, but every word is true and verified through multiple medical sources. The people who contract this virus don't just get sick and die peacefully. In the first 6 hours after infection, they experience severe headaches and confusion. Between hours 6 and 12, they lose the ability to recognize loved ones and begin displaying aggressive behavior. By hour 18, the frontal lobe damage is so extensive that they retain only the most primitive brain functions: hunger, rage, and the instinct to bite and attack anything that moves. We've been receiving reports from doctors, from police, from ordinary people who've watched their family members transform into something that isn't human anymore, something that attacks with their teeth and nails, something driven only by an insatiable need to spread the infection. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo from the CDC's Emergency Operations Center told us before we lost contact with Atlanta that the infected don't feel pain, don't respond to verbal commands, and will continue attacking until they're physically incapacitated or until the virus kills them, which typically happens between 48 and 72 hours after initial infection.
The origin point has been traced to a biological research facility outside Wuhan, China, where scientists were studying prion diseases similar to Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease and mad cow disease. According to intelligence we received from the Defense Intelligence Agency before the Pentagon ceased regular communications, there was an accidental release during a transfer procedure approximately 87 hours ago. Patient 0 was a laboratory technician named Dr. Lin Huang, who was exposed during what should have been a routine safety protocol. Dr. Huang left the facility believing he was uninfected because initial symptoms didn't manifest for nearly 6 hours. By the time he realized something was wrong, he'd had contact with approximately 47 people in Wuhan's central district. Those 47 people infected an average of 8 others each before they became symptomatic. The mathematical progression from that point is nightmarish. Within 24 hours of the initial release, we estimate 12,000 infections in Wuhan. Within 48 hours, 200 million infections across China, as people fled the quarantine zones and spread the pathogen through airports, train stations, and highways. China's last official government transmission reported total societal collapse in every major city before Beijing went dark.
But behind those staggering numbers are individual human tragedies that we need to acknowledge, because these aren't just statistics. These are people whose lives ended in the most horrific way imaginable. A woman named Michelle Torres from Seattle managed to get a message to us through a ham radio operator before her neighborhood was overrun. Michelle told us that her husband Carlos started showing symptoms yesterday morning, complaining of a headache and confusion after he'd helped a neighbor who'd been in a car accident 3 days earlier. Michelle said she watched the man she'd been married to for 16 years slowly disappear over the course of 12 hours. First he forgot her name, Then he didn't recognize their children. Then he started becoming violent, throwing furniture and screaming incoherently. Michelle locked herself and their 2 daughters in the bedroom and called 911, but emergency services never came because Seattle's infrastructure had already collapsed. She said the last thing Carlos did before he completely lost his humanity was pound on their bedroom door for 4 hours straight, and she could hear him, could hear the man she loved reduced to an animal making sounds that weren't words anymore, just rage and hunger. Michelle wanted us to tell people that if someone you love gets infected, you have to run. You have to save yourself because the person you knew is already gone.
Air travel has distributed the pathogen to every inhabited continent with devastating speed. Before international flights were grounded approximately 61 hours ago, infected individuals in the early asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic stages boarded commercial aircraft and spread the virus globally. We've confirmed major outbreaks in London, Paris, Berlin, Moscow, Tokyo, Seoul, Mumbai, Dubai, Cairo, Johannesburg, Sao Paulo, Mexico City, Toronto, Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, Atlanta, Miami, and approximately 247 other metropolitan areas worldwide. The progression in each city follows an identical pattern. First, scattered reports of violent attacks and bizarre behavior. Then, exponential increase in emergency room visits for bite wounds and unexplained aggression. Then, complete overwhelm of medical facilities within 12 to 18 hours as thousands of infected individuals reach the violent phase simultaneously. Then, total collapse of emergency services, law enforcement, and basic civil order within 36 to 48 hours, as first responders are either infected, killed, or abandon their posts to protect their families. We're estimating that 73% of the world's major cities have experienced complete breakdown of governmental authority, and are now essentially ungoverned zones where the infected vastly outnumber the healthy.
And in those zones, people are making impossible choices, doing things they never imagined they'd be capable of in order to survive. Officer Marcus Johnson of the Philadelphia Police Department got a message to us through their emergency radio network 2 hours ago. Marcus said his precinct was overrun yesterday when infected individuals attacked the building in a coordinated wave that nobody can explain because these people aren't supposed to have the cognitive ability to coordinate anything. But somehow hundreds of them surrounded the precinct simultaneously and broke through the doors. Marcus said he watched his partner of 8 years, a woman named Detective Amy Chen, get bitten trying to help a child who'd been separated from her parents. Within minutes, Amy started showing the first signs, the confusion and the headache, and Marcus said she looked at him with this expression of pure terror because she knew what was coming, and she begged him to shoot her before she turned into one of those things. Marcus couldn't do it. He ran instead, and now he's holed up in an apartment building with 17 other survivors. And he told us that the sound of Amy's screams when she fully turned is something that's going to haunt him until the day he dies, which he said might be today or tomorrow because the infected are everywhere now, and it's only a matter of time before they find a way in.
Military response has been fragmented and largely ineffective against a threat that spreads faster than conventional containment protocols can manage. The United States military attempted to establish quarantine perimeters around major metropolitan areas approximately 52 hours ago, but those perimeters were immediately compromised by infected individuals who'd already fled the cities and by military personnel who unknowingly brought the infection into the safe zones. Fort Bragg, Fort Hood, Camp Pendleton, Naval Station Norfolk, and approximately 37 other major military installations have reported infection outbreaks among personnel. The last communication we received from United States Northern Command indicated that they were implementing a fallback strategy, focusing on securing government continuity sites and critical infrastructure, rather than attempting to protect civilian population centers. In practical terms, this means the military has abandoned the cities and is concentrating resources on protecting essential government functions, leaving civilian populations to fend for themselves. Internationally, We've received scattered reports indicating that most national militaries are experiencing similar breakdowns. Russia's last official communication suggested they were preparing to use tactical nuclear weapons on Moscow, St. Petersburg, and other infected urban centers to prevent further spread, though we have no confirmation whether those strikes occurred.
But some soldiers are refusing those orders, choosing to stay and protect civilians even when their commanders tell them to retreat. Captain David Park of the United States Army sent us a message through a military radio frequency. Captain Park said his unit was ordered to withdraw from Los Angeles and relocate to a secure government facility in the Nevada desert, but when he gave that order to his soldiers, they refused. Every single one of them voted to stay and defend the civilian population of a community center in Pasadena, where 800 people, mostly families with children, had taken refuge. Captain Park said he faced a choice between following orders and abandoning those people, or staying with his soldiers and probably dying alongside them. He chose to stay. He told us that his unit of 42 soldiers has been holding the perimeter of that community center for 36 hours against waves of infected individuals, and they've lost 11 soldiers so far, but those 800 civilians are still alive and still have hope because someone decided they were worth protecting. Captain Park wanted other soldiers to know that orders are just words, but the lives you save are real. And when this is over, if any of us survive, we're going to have to live with the choices we made when humanity needed us most.
The scientific community's understanding of this pathogen is limited by the catastrophic speed of its spread and the collapse of research infrastructure globally. Before we lost contact with the World Health Organization, Dr. Elena Volkov, their chief epidemiologist, provided us with the most current analysis of NK7's mechanism of action. The pathogen is a mutated prion, a misfolded protein that causes other proteins in the brain to misfold in a cascade effect, similar to traditional prion diseases, but operating on a radically accelerated timeline. Traditional prion diseases, like Creutzfeldt-Jakob, take years to manifest. NK7 causes complete neurological destruction in 36 hours. The mutation appears to have enhanced the prion's ability to cross the blood-brain barrier and to resist the body's immune response. Dr. Volkov said that in her 30 years studying infectious diseases, she'd never seen anything remotely like this, and her assessment was that NK7 represents either an incredibly unlikely natural mutation or a deliberately engineered bioweapon that somehow escaped containment. She emphasized that there is currently no treatment, no vaccine, and no medical intervention that can stop the progression once infection occurs. If you're exposed, you will get sick, you will lose your mind, and you will die, typically after spreading the infection to everyone around you.
Which means that right now the only thing keeping people alive is isolation, barricades, and the courage to make terrible decisions when someone they love gets infected. A man named Robert Chen from San Francisco sent us a message that I almost couldn't bear to read on air, but he asked us to share it because he wanted other families to learn from his mistake. Robert said his daughter Emma, who's 15 years old, came home from school 3 days ago before the schools were closed and she had a headache. Robert thought it was just stress from exams. By that evening, Emma was confused and didn't recognize her mother. By midnight, she was violent, attacking her younger brother with a kitchen knife before Robert managed to lock her in the basement. Robert said the sounds coming from that basement, his daughter screaming and clawing at the door, went on for 2 days before Emma finally went silent. Robert told us that he should have left immediately when Emma first showed symptoms, should have taken his wife and son and gotten as far away as possible, but he couldn't abandon his daughter, couldn't accept that she was gone. Now his wife is showing symptoms because she got too close to the basement door when Emma was at her most violent, and Robert knows that within hours he's going to lose her too. And it's his fault for not making the hard choice when it mattered. He wanted other parents to know that you can't save someone who's infected. All you can do is save the people who aren't infected yet. And sometimes love means running away from someone you die for.
Infrastructure collapse is accelerating as critical personnel either become infected, flee their posts, or are killed trying to maintain essential services. Power grids in 17 major metropolitan areas have gone completely offline as utility workers abandon their positions. New York City went dark approximately 28 hours ago. Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, Philadelphia, and Phoenix followed within the next 12 hours. Without electrical power, water treatment facilities cease operation, hospitals lose life support capabilities, communication networks fail, and whatever thin veneer of civilization remains in the infected zones disappears entirely. We're receiving reports of massive fires burning unchecked in urban centers because fire departments no longer exist as functional organizations. Satellite imagery analyzed before we lost our connection to NASA showed approximately 47 major urban fires visible from space, with the largest consuming an estimated 30 square miles of Los Angeles and another 20 square miles of London. Without firefighting response, these conflagrations will continue spreading until they either exhaust their fuel or are stopped by geographical barriers. We're looking at the potential destruction of entire cities, not from the virus itself, but from the secondary effects of societal collapse.
But utility workers and first responders are still trying to keep the lights on and the water running in areas that haven't completely fallen because they understand that civilization is just a series of systems. And if enough people keep those systems working, there's still a chance for the uninfected to survive. Angela Martinez, an electrical engineer working for the power company in Austin, Texas, got a message to us through a citizens band radio network. Angela said that when most of her colleagues fled or stopped coming to work, she and 4 other engineers made a pact to keep Austin's power grid operational as long as physically possible. They're living at the power station, sleeping in shifts, rationing food and water, and manually operating systems that are designed to run automatically because the computer controls are failing without the technical support staff who've either died or disappeared. Angela told us about a moment yesterday when one of her colleagues, a man named Tom Sanders, started showing symptoms while he was in the middle of repairing a critical transformer. Tom realized what was happening, realized he had maybe 6 hours before he lost his mind completely, and he worked straight through those 6 hours to finish the repair even as the headache got worse, and the confusion started setting in. When Tom finished the job, he said goodbye to Angela and the others, walked outside the facility, and shot himself rather than risk infecting his colleagues or becoming one of those things. Angela said Tom's last words were that keeping the lights on matters because every hour the power stays on is another hour that families can stay together, can have clean water, can maintain some fragment of normalcy, and he wasn't going to let his infection take that away from people.
Medical facilities have transitioned from treatment centers to death traps, as infected individuals in the early stages seek help, only to turn violent while surrounded by vulnerable patients and overwhelmed staff. The American Medical Association's last broadcast reported that approximately 84% of hospitals in major metropolitan areas have been evacuated or overrun. Doctors and nurses who stayed at their posts to treat the sick have been attacked, infected, and killed in staggering numbers. We're estimating that the mortality rate among healthcare workers exceeds 60% globally, representing the loss of millions of trained medical professionals whose expertise would be critical for any recovery effort. The few hospitals still functioning are operating under siege conditions, with armed guards screening everyone who enters for symptoms and instructions to immediately shoot anyone who shows signs of infection. This creates impossible ethical dilemmas for medical professionals, whose entire training centers on healing and preserving life, now forced to become executioners to protect uninfected patients. Several doctors have told us through radio communications that they're experiencing severe psychological trauma from being forced to kill patients. Sometimes people they've been treating for years, the moment those patients show symptoms.
And yet there are doctors who are continuing to treat people, continuing to practice medicine under conditions that would break most of us, because they took an oath and they meant it. Dr. James Mwangi, who runs a small medical clinic in Nairobi, Kenya, reached us through a missionary radio network. Dr. Mwangi said his clinic has become a fortress where he and 3 nurses are treating injuries and illnesses unrelated to the virus for the 43 families who've taken shelter in the surrounding buildings. They screen every person who comes for treatment, check for symptoms, and they've had to turn away 7 people in the last 2 days who were showing early signs of infection. Dr. Mwangi said having to tell a father with 3 children that he can't come in for treatment, knowing that man is going to die alone in the street, goes against everything he believes as a doctor. But if he lets one infected person inside, everyone in that building dies. He told us about a woman named Amara who came to his clinic yesterday with a broken arm from falling while running from infected individuals. While Dr. Mwangi was setting the bone, Amara started showing symptoms, the confusion and the headache. Dr. Mwangi said he had maybe 10 minutes before she became dangerous, and Amara knew it too. She begged him to give her something to end it peacefully before she turned, and Dr. Mwangi, who's a deeply religious man, who's never deliberately ended a life, made the decision to give her an overdose of morphine. Amara died in her sleep instead of becoming a monster. And Dr. Mwangi said he doesn't know if God will forgive him for what he did, but he knows Amara would have thanked him if she could have.
Safe zones are being established in rural areas, small towns, and isolated communities that have implemented strict quarantine protocols, but sustainability of these zones remains questionable. Communities that blocked roads, destroyed bridges, and prevented any outside contact have so far avoided infection, but they're isolated from supply chains and resource networks. We're receiving reports of successful defensive actions by small towns that organized armed perimeters and refused entry to refugees from cities, sometimes using lethal force against people desperately seeking safety. The ethical implications are staggering. Communities saving themselves by condemning others to death. But the mathematical reality is that these protocols are effective. The town of Elk Ridge, Wyoming, population approximately 1,100, established a complete quarantine 70 hours ago and has reported 0 infections. They've turned away more than 3,000 refugees, many of whom were uninfected but couldn't prove it. And according to the mayor's radio transmission, they will continue shooting anyone who approaches their perimeter, regardless of apparent health status, because they cannot risk a single infected individual breaking through. This is the brutal calculus of survival in a pandemic, where infection equals death and compassion equals vulnerability.
But there are communities that are finding ways to help refugees without compromising their safety. Communities that refuse to accept that survival requires abandoning our humanity. Pastor Michael Okafor of a rural church in Montana sent us a message through their community radio station. Pastor Okafor said his congregation made a different choice when refugees started arriving from Seattle and Portland. Instead of turning people away or shooting them, they established a quarantine protocol. Refugees are directed to an isolated barn complex 2 miles from the main town where they're provided with food, water, and shelter. They must remain in quarantine for 72 hours, which is longer than the maximum incubation period, with daily symptom checks performed from a safe distance. Anyone who shows symptoms is immediately isolated in a separate building and provided with pain medication and companionship via radio communication until they die. It's not perfect, Pastor Okafor said. They've had to watch 12 people die in isolation over the last 2 days, but they've successfully integrated 43 refugees into their community, people who would have died on the roads if nobody had been willing to help them. Pastor Okafor told us that his community believes that if we abandon compassion to survive, then the virus has already killed the most important part of us, and they'd rather die trying to save people than live knowing they turned away the desperate and afraid.
Communication networks are degrading rapidly as power failures, infrastructure damage, and personnel losses cascade through telecommunications systems. Cell phone networks have been offline in most major cities for more than 24 hours. Internet connectivity has collapsed across approximately 60% of the globe. Landline telephone systems are failing as switching stations lose power and maintenance personnel disappear. Radio communication, particularly ham radio and emergency broadcast frequencies, represents the only remaining reliable means of long-distance communication, and even those systems are becoming increasingly fragile as broadcasters either become infected, run out of fuel for generators, or simply go silent for unknown reasons. We've lost contact with broadcasting stations in Tokyo, Beijing, Moscow, London, Paris, Berlin, Rome, Cairo, Mumbai, Lagos, São Paulo, and approximately 140 other cities in the last 12 hours alone. The silence is perhaps more terrifying than the reports of horror, because we don't know if those cities have been completely overrun, if everyone is dead, or if survivors simply have no way to communicate. We could be talking to a fraction of the remaining uninfected population, while millions of others survive in isolated pockets with no knowledge that anyone else is still alive.
But radio operators are staying at their posts, maintaining these communication lifelines even as the world collapses around them, because they understand that hope requires connection. Harold Schmidt, the 78-year-old ham radio operator from Omaha, who we spoke with during the internet blackout, is still broadcasting. Harold got a message to us saying that his wife Martha was bitten by an infected neighbor who broke into their home 2 days ago. Harold said he watched Martha go through all the stages, watched the woman he'd been married to for 54 years lose her mind over the course of 18 hours. When Martha reached the violent stage, Harold locked her in their basement and returned to his radio because, as he told us, people need to know they're not alone more now than ever. Harold has been broadcasting continuously for 68 hours, coordinating communication between survivors across the central United States, passing messages between family members, providing information about safe routes and dangerous areas. He told us that he can hear Martha in the basement, can hear the sounds she's making, and he knows that the woman he loves is gone, but he can't bring himself to end it, can't go down there, and finish what the virus started. So instead, Harold sits at his radio and helps other people stay alive, stay connected, and stay human, because if he can't save Martha, at least he can honor her memory by making sure other people don't die alone in the dark.
Food distribution systems have collapsed entirely, creating immediate starvation threats in urban areas and longer-term sustainability concerns in rural safe zones. Supermarkets in infected cities were looted and emptied within the first 24 hours of the outbreak. Supply chain networks that depend on trucking, rail, and air freight have ceased functioning. Agricultural production continues in some areas, but without transportation infrastructure and distribution networks, food rots in fields and warehouses while people starve in cities. We're estimating that urban populations who haven't evacuated have access to between 3 and 7 days of food supplies, after which mass starvation becomes inevitable. The grim calculus suggests that starvation may kill as many people as the virus itself in the coming weeks. Survival increasingly depends on access to local food production, water sources, and the knowledge to sustain life without modern supply chains. Communities with agricultural capability, well water, and the security to protect those resources will survive. Urban populations dependent on external supplies are facing a death sentence measured in days or weeks, not months.
Yet farmers are trying to feed people anyway, finding ways to get food to those who need it despite every system failing. Robert and Ellen Fitzgerald, the dairy farmers from Wisconsin we heard from during the internet blackout, sent us another message. The Fitzgeralds said their farm has become a refuge for 73 people who fled Milwaukee before the city was completely overrun. They're growing emergency crops, rationing supplies, and teaching people who've never grown food in their lives how to plant seeds and harvest vegetables, because those skills might be the difference between life and death in the coming months. Ellen told us about a corporate lawyer from Milwaukee named David Chen, who showed up at their farm 3 days ago with his 2 teenage sons. David had never done manual labor in his life, spent his entire career in air-conditioned offices, but Ellen said he's been working 18-hour days in the fields, learning to milk cows and plant potatoes and repair equipment, because he's determined to contribute, determined to earn his family's place in this community. David told Ellen that he spent 40 years of his life in meetings and depositions and courtrooms arguing about things that seem completely meaningless now, and discovering that he can grow food with his hands, can create something real and necessary, has given him more purpose than anything he did in his previous life. The Fitzgeralds said if cities fall completely, if modern civilization doesn't survive, the communities that make it through will be the ones where people remember how to feed themselves.
We need to address the question of long-term survival and whether human civilization can endure a pandemic of this magnitude and speed. The mathematics are catastrophic. We're 73 hours into the outbreak, with 412 million confirmed infections and 93 million confirmed deaths. If the infection rate continues at current pace and no effective containment is achieved, epidemiological models suggest we could see 2 billion infections within 1 week and potential human extinction within 30 to 45 days as the virus spreads through the remaining uninfected population faster than people can isolate themselves. The only factors that might prevent total extinction are geographical isolation, successful quarantine protocols in areas that haven't yet been exposed, and the possibility that the virus might burn itself out as it exhausts the available host population in densely infected areas. We've received unconfirmed reports that some island nations, New Zealand, Iceland, and several Pacific island states, successfully closed their borders before the virus arrived and remain completely uninfected. If those reports are accurate, those populations represent potential seeds for human survival even if continental populations are wiped out. The question becomes not whether humanity survives, but how many survive and what kind of world they'll inherit.
And in the face of those apocalyptic projections, people are still choosing to live, to love, to create meaning in whatever time remains. We received a message that made me cry, made me remember why we're doing this broadcast even when it seems pointless. A couple in Vancouver, Thomas and Sarah Kowalski, who we heard from during the internet blackout trying to reach their daughter in Australia, sent us a new message. Thomas said they never found out what happened to Anna, never got confirmation whether she's alive or dead, but he and Sarah have opened their home to 6 children whose parents were infected in the first wave. These kids, ranging from 4 years old to 13, were found wandering the streets alone, orphaned by the virus, and Thomas and Sarah took them in even though it meant bringing strangers into their home, even though any one of those children could have been carrying the infection. Thomas said all 6 kids are healthy, they've been in the house for 48 hours with no symptoms, and he and Sarah are now parents to 6 traumatized children who need love and stability, and someone to tell them that the world isn't entirely made of horror. Thomas told us that he and Sarah always wanted a big family, and while this isn't how they imagined it happening, these children need them, and they're going to provide whatever safety and love they can for however long any of them have left. That's not surrender, that's not despair, that's defiant hope in the face of extinction.
Government continuity operations have fragmented into isolated command centers with limited communication and coordination capability. The President of the United States and essential cabinet members were evacuated to the Mount Weather Emergency Operations Center approximately 65 hours ago, but we've received no official communications from that facility in the last 18 hours. FEMA's emergency broadcast system has gone silent. The Pentagon's last transmission indicated they were implementing decentralized command protocols as central coordination became impossible. Internationally, we know that the British government evacuated to secure facilities in Scotland, the French government relocated to bunkers in the Pyrenees, and the German government dispersed to multiple secure sites. But actual governmental function appears to have ceased in any meaningful sense. Without communication infrastructure, without ability to coordinate military and emergency services, without control over territory now dominated by infected populations, governments exist only as isolated groups of officials hiding in bunkers with no real authority over events. The vacuum of legitimate authority has allowed local strongmen, militia groups, and ad hoc community organizations to become the de facto governing structures in areas where uninfected populations remain. We're witnessing the end of nation-states and the return to tribal-level human organization.
But some government officials are refusing to hide in bunkers, choosing instead to stay with the people they swore to serve. Mayor Jennifer Watkins, who we heard from during the internet blackout running a small town in Colorado, sent us an update. Mayor Watkins said her town has taken in refugees from Denver and Colorado Springs, and their population has swelled from 800 to nearly 4,000 people. They've had to implement strict quarantine protocols. They've lost 37 people to the infection, but they're maintaining civil order, distributing resources fairly, and creating something that resembles functional community governance. Mayor Watkins told us she was advised by state officials to evacuate to a secure government facility in the mountains, but she refused because her people need leadership more now than ever, and leadership means being present, being visible, making hard decisions in real time, not hiding underground while communities tear themselves apart. She wanted other mayors and local officials to know that if they run, their communities will collapse. But if they stay and lead with courage and compassion, there's still a chance to preserve something worth saving. Mayor Watkins said she might die here, probably will die here, but at least she'll die knowing she didn't abandon the people who trusted her with authority.
We've just received critical information from Dr. Sarah Okonkwo at the CDC's Emergency Operations Center, transmitted through a military satellite phone connection that's likely our last contact with Atlanta. Dr. Okonkwo reports that CDC researchers working in Level 4 biosafety conditions have identified a potential weakness in the NK7 prion structure. The pathogen requires specific temperature ranges to maintain its infectious capability. Exposure to temperatures below -40 degrees Celsius or above 60 degrees Celsius for sustained periods appears to denature the prion and render it non-infectious. This discovery has limited immediate practical application for treatment of infected individuals, but it suggests that the virus may be geographically constrained by climate conditions. Arctic and subarctic regions may represent natural barriers to transmission. Additionally, the discovery means that any materials that might be contaminated, clothing, bedding, medical equipment, can be sterilized through extreme heat or cold. Dr. Okonkwo emphasized this doesn't provide a cure or a treatment, and it doesn't help people who are already infected. But it does give uninfected populations a tool for decontamination, and suggests that human populations in extreme northern latitudes might have natural protection against the virus spreading in their regions. She said the CDC is now offline permanently. Their facility has been compromised by infected personnel, and this is likely her last transmission.
Which means that the people who might survive this are those living in places we usually think of as inhospitable, the far north where temperatures naturally kill the pathogen. Communities in Alaska, northern Canada, Siberia, Scandinavia, they might have a chance that the rest of us don't. But even that information, even that small hope, comes from a woman who knew she was about to die and used her last minutes of life to give the rest of us something useful. Dr. Okonkwo told us in her final message that she's proud of the work her team did, that they solved the puzzle even though they won't survive to see the solution implemented, and she wanted families of CDC workers to know that the scientists stayed at their posts until the very end, that they kept working even when infected individuals broke through the security barriers, even when they knew the facility would be overrun, because that's what scientists do. They seek truth, and they share knowledge even when sharing that knowledge is the last thing they'll ever do. Dr. Okonkwo's last words were a message to her daughter Zara, who's 12 years old and was evacuated to a safe facility in Minnesota. She said, "Zara, Mommy loves you. Mommy fought to keep the world safe for you, and you need to be brave and smart and kind no matter what happens, because the world is going to need people like you to rebuild." Then the transmission ended and Atlanta went silent.
Armed conflict has erupted in multiple locations as desperate populations clash over resources, safe territories, and access to uninfected zones. We're receiving reports of military units fighting each other for control of secure government facilities. Civilian militias are engaging in territorial battles over farmland, water sources, and defensible positions. The town of Elk Ridge, Wyoming, which successfully quarantined itself, has repelled 3 separate armed assaults by groups attempting to force entry into their safe zone. The most recent attack involved approximately 200 armed individuals from a collapsed refugee camp who attempted to storm the town's perimeter yesterday. Elk Ridge defenders killed 67 attackers and lost 9 defenders. This pattern is repeating across isolated safe zones worldwide. Communities that successfully protected themselves from infection are now facing threats from desperate uninfected populations who'll use violence to gain access to safety. We're also receiving disturbing reports of organized groups using infected individuals as biological weapons, herding them toward enemy positions or releasing them into rival safe zones. Humanity's response to existential threat is revealing both our greatest courage and our darkest capabilities.
But there are also stories of communities choosing cooperation over conflict, choosing to share rather than fight. Pastor Okafor from Montana reached out again with an update that gives me hope even now. His community has established communication with 4 other nearby towns, and instead of viewing each other as competitors for limited resources, they've created a mutual aid network. Each town specializes in producing specific resources. One focuses on grain production, another on livestock, another on medical supplies and treatment, another on manufacturing and tool repair, and they trade and share between communities to ensure everyone survives. Pastor Okafor said they had a meeting of representatives from all 5 towns, held in a field equidistant from each community with everyone maintaining safe distances, and they voted unanimously to refuse admission to anyone who wants to join their network through violence or coercion, but to welcome anyone who arrives peacefully and is willing to contribute. They've successfully integrated 327 refugees into their network in the last 2 days, people who've been screened, quarantined, and then assigned to communities where their skills are needed. Pastor Okafor said this is how humanity survives, not through walls and weapons, but through cooperation and shared purpose, and he believes that the communities that make it through this catastrophe will be the ones that remembered we're stronger together than we are alone.
I need to give you an updated casualty assessment based on the most recent data we've compiled from functioning emergency services, medical facilities, and survivor networks. We are now 73 hours into the outbreak. Confirmed global infections have reached 412 million people. Confirmed deaths have reached 93 million, and are increasing by approximately 15 million every 6 hours as infected individuals reach the terminal stage. If current infection rates continue, we project 1.2 billion infections by hour 96, 2.8 billion infections by hour 120, and potential majority infection of the global population within 7 to 10 days. The only factors limiting spread at this point are geographical barriers, successful isolation protocols, and the fact that infected individuals die relatively quickly and therefore have a limited window to spread the pathogen. The secondary death toll from infrastructure collapse, violence, starvation, and lack of medical care for non-virus related conditions is estimated at an additional 40 million people and rising. We're looking at total mortality potentially exceeding 150 million within the first week. And if the virus continues spreading unchecked, we could see human population reduced to isolated pockets of survivors, numbering in the tens of millions rather than billions.
And every single one of those numbers represents someone's mother, father, child, friend, someone who had dreams and fears, and people who loved them. We've been receiving final messages from people all over the world who want their stories told, who want someone to remember that they existed, that they mattered. A woman named Yuki Tanaka from Tokyo sent us a message through a ship-to-shore radio. Yuki said Tokyo is completely overrun. The streets are filled with millions of infected individuals, and she's trapped on the roof of her apartment building with her 8-year-old son, Kenji. They have no food left and no water, and Yuki knows they're going to die within the next day or two, either from dehydration or when the infected finally find a way onto the roof. Yuki wanted us to tell the world about Kenji, that he's a beautiful, brave little boy who loves drawing pictures of astronauts and wants to explore space someday. She said Kenji doesn't understand why the sick people are trying to hurt them, doesn't understand why his father didn't come home from work 3 days ago, and Yuki has been telling him that everything's going to be okay even though she knows it's not. Yuki's last request was that if anyone survives this, if humanity has a future, someone should remember that a little boy named Kenji Tanaka dreamed of the stars and should have had the chance to reach them.
The question everyone is asking is whether there's any possibility of medical intervention, any chance of developing a treatment or vaccine that could stop this pandemic. The brutal reality is that traditional vaccine development takes years, and prion diseases have historically been untreatable. The speed at which NK7 operates makes development of any medical intervention nearly impossible within a time frame that matters. Even if researchers in isolated facilities managed to develop a treatment, they would have no way to manufacture it at scale, no way to distribute it to billions of people, and no infrastructure to administer it. The collapse of global supply chains, Pharmaceutical manufacturing and medical systems means that even if a miracle cure existed, we couldn't get it to the people who need it. Dr. Elena Volkov told us before Geneva went silent that the best hope isn't medical intervention, it's isolation and time. If enough people can isolate themselves successfully for long enough, the virus will burn through the infected population. Those people will die, and the pathogen will have no remaining hosts to spread to. This means survival depends on the willingness of uninfected individuals to completely isolate themselves, even from other apparently healthy people, because anyone could be carrying the infection in the early asymptomatic stages.
But doctors and researchers are still trying to find answers, still working to understand this pathogen even when it seems pointless. Dr. Raj Patel, the network engineer from Mumbai who built a local mesh network during the internet blackout, sent us a message saying he's been working with a virologist named Dr. Priya Sharma, who's been conducting research in a makeshift laboratory in their isolated community. Dr. Sharma has been studying blood samples from infected individuals in different stages of the disease, and she believes she's identified a genetic factor that might provide some people with partial resistance to the virus. It's not immunity. People with this genetic variation still get infected, but their progression from initial symptoms to the violent stage takes 48 to 60 hours instead of 18 to 24 hours. That extended timeline gives them more time to isolate themselves, more time to say goodbye to loved ones, and potentially more time for their bodies to fight the infection. Dr. Sharma wanted us to share this information because even though it doesn't provide a cure, it might help people understand why some individuals seem to resist longer than others. And it might give researchers in other isolated communities a direction for future study if humanity survives long enough for future study to matter. Dr. Patel said that Dr. Sharma is working 16-hour days in a laboratory with equipment that would have seemed primitive a week ago. And she's doing it because she believes that understanding this virus is important even if the knowledge can't save her or anyone she knows.
Safe zones are beginning to establish communication networks and coordinate survival strategies, creating what might become the foundation of post-pandemic human civilization. We've identified approximately 240 isolated communities worldwide that have successfully maintained quarantine protocols and remain uninfected. These range from small towns like Elk Ridge, Wyoming, to larger networks like Pastor Okafor's coalition in Montana, to confirmed reports of entire regions of Iceland and New Zealand maintaining infection-free status. These communities are sharing information about sustainable food production, water purification, security protocols, and governance structures through the remaining radio networks. What's emerging is a distributed network of isolated human populations who may represent the seeds of human survival if continental populations are wiped out. The concerning variable is sustainability. Many of these communities are dependent on stored fuel, ammunition, and supplies that will eventually run out. Long-term survival requires transition to sustainable agriculture, renewable energy, and self-sufficient manufacturing capability. Communities with those capabilities will survive. Communities dependent on external resources will face collapse when those resources are exhausted.
And people are learning those skills, adapting to a world where you can't just go to a store and buy what you need. Emily Richardson, the third-grade teacher from Iowa who was visiting her students during the internet blackout, sent us an update that shows how people are transforming themselves to survive. Emily said her small town has organized into work groups, with everyone contributing based on their abilities. Emily is teaching children in the mornings and working in the fields in the afternoons. The corporate lawyer David Chen, who fled Milwaukee, is now the community's blacksmith, learning to forge tools and repair equipment using techniques he's finding in old books from the library. A software engineer named Lisa Park is learning to be a midwife because their town's only doctor is 76 years old and they need someone younger learning medical skills. Emily said watching people completely reinvent themselves, watching a generation that grew up with smartphones and internet learning to live like their great-grandparents is both heartbreaking and inspiring. She told us about a 16-year-old girl named Sophie, the same Sophie who cried when Emily came to read to her, who's become the town's primary beekeeper. Sophie had never seen a beehive in her life a week ago, and now she's responsible for pollination of their crops and honey production, and she's thriving at it. Emily said, if we survive this, If humanity continues, the survivors are going to be fundamentally different people than we were before the virus. Harder, more capable, more connected to the physical world and to each other.
We've received confirmation of a development that changes the strategic picture significantly. The United States military, operating from the Continuity facility at Mount Weather, has broadcast a message on all military frequencies announcing implementation of what they're calling Protocol Sanctuary. All military personnel, government officials, and civilians in secure government facilities are being relocated to 3 primary preservation sites, one in Alaska, one in the Colorado Rockies, and one in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. These sites were selected based on geographic isolation, defensibility, access to fresh water and agricultural land, and climatic conditions that may inhibit virus transmission based on Dr. Okonkwo's temperature research. The broadcast indicated that relocation operations are underway and that these sites will not accept any additional civilians, any personnel not on pre-approved lists, or anyone who cannot prove they've been in isolation for a minimum of 96 hours. This represents the government's assessment that majority population survival is impossible, and that resources should be concentrated on preserving a small number of essential personnel who can rebuild civilization after the pandemic burns itself out. The broadcast estimated that Protocol Sanctuary sites will house approximately 40,000 people total, representing less than 0.01% of the United States population.
Which means the government has officially written off 335 million people, decided that we're not worth saving, that their survival matters more than ours. I understand the logic. I understand that they're trying to preserve some fragment of government and civilization, but hearing that broadcast, hearing that my government has decided that I'm expendable along with hundreds of millions of other people, that's a betrayal that's hard to process. But you know what? Maybe we don't need them. Maybe the people who are going to rebuild humanity aren't the government officials hiding in bunkers. Maybe they're the farmers like Robert and Ellen Fitzgerald who are teaching refugees how to grow food. Maybe they're the teachers like Emily Richardson who are making sure children still learn and grow. Maybe they're the engineers like Angela Martinez who are keeping the lights on even when it seems pointless. Maybe they're the doctors like James Mwangi who are treating the sick even when it means making impossible ethical choices. Maybe they're the radio operators like Harold Schmidt who are maintaining human connection even while listening to their loved ones die in the basement. Maybe the future belongs to the people who stayed and fought and helped each other instead of the people who ran to their secure facilities and locked the doors behind them. I'd rather die out here with people who care about each other than survive in a bunker full of officials who valued their own lives more than the people they swore to serve.
Personal message from James Carter. Not as a broadcaster, but as a human being facing the same fear everyone listening is facing. I've been giving you statistics and projections and technical analysis for 73 hours, maintaining professional objectivity, delivering information without emotion. But I need you to know that I'm terrified. I have a sister in Boston who I haven't heard from in 2 days. I don't know if she's alive, if she's infected, if she died screaming like so many others, and the not knowing is destroying me. I stayed here in this studio because I believed that providing information could save lives, that coordination and communication could make a difference. But I'm starting to wonder if anything we do matters when the numbers are this catastrophic. Kate and I have enough supplies to last another week, maybe 2, if we're careful. And then we face the choice of staying here and starving, or trying to reach one of the safe zones and probably getting infected or killed along the way. I don't know what the right choice is. I don't know if there is a right choice. I'm a data analyst. I'm trained to look at numbers and make rational decisions, and the numbers are telling me that humanity is probably going to go extinct in the next 30 to 60 days, and I don't know how to broadcast hope when the data suggests there isn't any.
James, you've been strong for 73 hours. You're allowed to be afraid. We're all afraid. And I think people need to hear that we're human too, that we're facing the same terror they are. My daughter Emma is in Seattle, or was in Seattle, I don't know anymore. She's 23 years old, she's smart and resourceful, and I keep telling myself she found a way out, she got to safety, but I heard the reports from Seattle, I know what happened there, and the realistic part of me knows she's probably dead or infected or one of those things wandering the streets. I'm her mother, I'm supposed to protect her, and instead I'm in Denver, broadcasting to strangers while my daughter is alone in hell. But I'm staying here, I'm continuing to broadcast, because if Emma somehow survived, if she's listening, I want her to hear my voice and know that her mother didn't give up, didn't stop fighting, and neither should she. And I want every parent listening who doesn't know where their children are to know that you're not alone in that pain, that I'm feeling it too, that we're all carrying losses and fears that are almost unbearable, but we carry them anyway because giving up isn't an option. The virus can kill our bodies, but it can't kill our love for the people we've lost, and that love means something. It has to mean something, even if they're gone.
We're now 76 hours into the outbreak, and I need to give you a final comprehensive assessment of where humanity stands. Global infections are estimated at 540 million. Confirmed deaths have reached 137 million. We've lost contact with every major city on every continent. Governments have either collapsed or retreated to bunkers. Power grids are failing globally. Communication networks are fragmenting into isolated radio systems. Food distribution has ceased entirely. Medical infrastructure is destroyed. We're projecting 2 billion infections by day 5, 4 billion infections by day 7, and majority global infection by day 10. Unless geographical isolation and quarantine protocols slow transmission rates significantly. The only confirmed safe zones are isolated communities, island nations, Arctic regions, and the military preservation sites. We estimate that if current trends continue, human population will be reduced from 8 billion to somewhere between 50 million and 200 million survivors in isolated pockets scattered across the globe. The world as we knew it is gone. The question isn't whether we can save civilization. The question is whether we can save enough people to build something new from the ruins.
But those 50 to 200 million people, if they survive, if they make it through the next few weeks, they're going to be the most resilient, resourceful, courageous humans who've ever lived. They're going to be people who survived the worst catastrophe in human history through a combination of intelligence, luck, and the willingness to make impossible choices. They're going to be the farmers and engineers and teachers and doctors and soldiers and parents who refused to give up when surrender seemed rational. They're going to build a world that's harder than the one we lost, with less technology, less comfort, less of the abundance we took for granted. But maybe they'll build something better in the ways that matter. Maybe they'll build communities that actually care for their vulnerable members instead of abandoning them. Maybe they'll build systems that are resilient instead of efficient. Maybe they'll remember that human connection is more important than convenience. Maybe the virus will have burned away everything superficial and left only the essential core of what makes us human. I don't know if that's enough reason to hope, but it's what I'm choosing to believe because the alternative is despair. And despair doesn't save anyone.
The virus will ultimately kill approximately 1,300,000,000 people directly through infection, and another 600 million through starvation, violence, and infrastructure collapse. The human population will be reduced to approximately 6.1 billion survivors scattered across safe zones, isolated communities, and climate-protected regions. The world our descendants inherit will be divided into isolated pockets of humanity with limited contact between them for years or decades. Technology will regress to early 20th century levels in most areas. Governments as we know them will not survive. What emerges will be smaller, more localized, more focused on immediate survival than global coordination. Medical science will lose decades of progress. Communication will depend on radio and human couriers. Transportation will revert to basic technologies. But humanity will survive because we're survivors, because we're adaptable, because we refuse to accept extinction even when extinction seems inevitable. The question was never whether some of us would make it through. The question was how many and what they would build afterward. I believe the answer is enough. and I believe what they build will be worth fighting for.